Now back to the question of what the hell is going on in the world when it comes to new or broken alliances, right? First, there's Bibi Netanyahu. He's calling on Moscow and Russian President Putin after being showered with adoration by President Trump. And many people ask, well, what gives? And then there's an even more bizarre alliance as Brazil's embattled President Bolsonaro meets with Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu as well. With more on these confusing meetings during these confusing times, here is RT correspondent John Huddy.
Call it the Bibi and Bolsonaro bromance. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro meeting in Israel during Bolsonaro's 4-day trip to the Holy Land. It kicked off Sunday with a warm hug on the tarmac. Later, the two leaders signed agreements pledging cooperation on cybersecurity, defense, and trade.
We're happy that after years of relations that were a little strained, we've decided together to open an era of partnership and cooperation with Brazil in all areas.
Brazil made a change. We are looking to expand our business dealings around the world. We want Israel to get as close as possible to the best in the world.
The Brazilian president's trip is perhaps a sign of things to come between the two countries that have had an icy political relationship the past 70 years. Though both are popular tourist destinations, Brazil for many Israelis and Israel for many Brazilian pilgrims. Bolsonaro and Netanyahu share similar traits. Both are right-wing politicians known for their hardline views on security, defense, and law enforcement. Both men are also contentious figures on the world stage. Bolsonaro has been called by some the, quote, Donald Trump of Brazil, and Netanyahu has been criticized for his friendships with other divisive leaders, such as Russian President Vladimir Putin, whom he'll be meeting with Thursday in Moscow, and Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte. Both Netanyahu and Bolsonaro are also mutual admirers of President Trump. During his visit this week, Bolsonaro was expected to follow President Trump's lead, moving the Brazilian embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. Instead, Brazil announced the opening of a trade mission in Jerusalem. Some suggest it is the first step in moving the Brazilian embassy. If anything, the Brazilian president's trip is another strong show of support for Netanyahu just a week before Israel's elections, as the bromance between Bibi and Bolsonaro continues to bloom. For the news with Rick Sanchez, John Huddy, RT.
There he is. That's John Jordan. He is a former naval intelligence person who also, by the way, happens to be someone with a depth understanding of what's going on throughout the world from a geopolitical standpoint. We don't always agree, but we always respect, and we're glad to have him on. John, let me start asking you about this visit between Netanyahu and President Putin. What do you make of that?
This is a really big story. What has not been widely reported, Rick, is that on Monday and Tuesday, there was an Israeli airstrike against an Iranian ammunition dump that was being used by Hezbollah in Syria. Immediately after that, there was a phone call between Benjamin Netanyahu and Putin at the Israelis' request. Interestingly enough, also, Benjamin Netanyahu and the Israeli cabinet doesn't have a defense minister right now. So Benjamin Netanyahu, in addition to being prime minister, is also the defense minister and is personally handling a lot of this. There's been a lot of deconfliction issues, making sure that IDF strikes don't hit Russian targets, and that there's a modus operandi between Russia and Israel, and I think they may have rubbed up against that, and they had to go work something out, and I think we're going to find out what that is in the coming days.
So you think the reason he was really there was to smooth things over about any potential, military excursions going into that part of, Syria and Lebanon specifically?
Syria and inside Syria, the IDF strikes inside of Syria. There may have been a deconfliction issue where there was a Hezbollah or Iranian target that was too close to a Russian installation, and this needed to be resolved. In that the Israelis wanted separation between that so they could hit that without hitting a Russian target. The other possibility is that there are talks going on right now about the Russians taking responsibility for Syria and removing Iran at Israel's request. That's also a possibility.
Well, let me throw something at you then. Given that the United States has such a frictionless relationship right now with the Russians, the Trump administration has not been kind to Russia, at least not in some of its recent measures. might this trip from Netanyahu to Putin be a way of saying from Putin to Donald Trump, we're great friends, we may be besties, but I'm not going to stop having a relationship with the Russians, no matter how much of a friend you may be to us?
No, absolutely not. The Hezbollah in Syria is an existential national security issue for Israel, and Benjamin Netanyahu has staked his political credibility on it. If the United States wants to deal itself out of Syria, that's what President Trump is going to do, but the Israelis still have their interests there.
John Jordan, as usual, bringing us up to date even on some of the things we weren't aware of. Making news. Thanks, John Jordan. I'm Rick Sanchez. You found us on YouTube, and that's awesome. But you know what? I'm also live every night at 7 and 8 p.m. Eastern on DirecTV and Dish and cable and satellite, the RT app, and Pluto TV. I'll see you there.